Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is Wednesday, the 27th of August, all day. This is the Morning Blast where myself and Mr. Michael Brown will be giving a preview of yesterday and a review of yesterday and a preview of today. And all the things that matter most to markets, add a bit of value, maybe put a smile on your face, etc., etc. But before we do, I will get the legals out of the way. Nothing discussed in the Spaces session constitute trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, myself, Ryan Paisley, or indeed Mr. Michael Brown. How are you, Mr. Michael Brown?
Good morning to you, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Not too bad at all, thank you, mate. Although I must admit, it does appear that summer may well be over. The sun appears to have gone away, and looking at the weather forecast, we're due for a bit of downpour for the next couple of days.
It's still nice and warm, though.
Well, not quite warm enough for shorts, I don't think.
I don't really want to picture you in shorts, to be honest, but there we go.
Well, I was yesterday, so.
Well, keep it that way, yeah. Enough about your legs. What's going on?
Oh, I do apologise if anyone has just joined this call this morning. They'll be wondering what on earth we're on about. But yes, let's crack on with the market stuff. Plenty to talk about once more, mainly around the Fed, which is where we will start. Of course, these shenanigans regarding the, potential, I'm going to say, firing of Fed Governor Lisa Cook continuing. Of course, you recall early yesterday morning, Trump posting on Truth Social that he has fired Governor Cook from her position. We heard from Governor Cook's lawyers yesterday, who said that she will file a lawsuit challenging this firing. Of course, speaking of lawsuits, it's worth bearing in mind that, to the best of my knowledge, the Department of Justice haven't actually filed any charges against Governor Cook at this moment in time. So the situation remains very, very messy indeed. And nonetheless, it does seem almost inevitable that this is going to end up in a very drawn-out legal challenge that could go all the way up to the Supreme Court. Clearly, Governor Cook herself is going to fight things as much as she can. In terms of the Fed, we did have a statement from a Fed spokesperson yesterday noting that the Fed, very much a boilerplate statement, to be honest, noting that the Fed would just abide by any court ruling as and when that is made. The one thing that we are not too clear on is whether Cook actually went to work yesterday, which, as silly as it sounds, is something that is relatively important because you can certainly imagine a world where if, let's say, Cook did make some sort of policy decision or some sort of signed some bit of paperwork yesterday and then is eventually removed for cause, you can imagine this being the sort of vindictive Trump administration that would go after anyone else at the Fed who facilitated, letting her in the building and holding the door open for her that day as also being sort of complicit in what's going on. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. In terms of other bits and bobs regarding the Fed, in terms of Lisa Cook specifically, the Wall Street Journal reporting yesterday via their sources that Trump is seeking to move quickly in order to replace Lisa Cook. So as far as he's concerned, she is out. He's got another spot on the board to fill. There are a number of names in the mix for that position. Options said to include potentially moving Steve Moran, who is currently serving out the rest of Governor Kugler's term until the end of January. He could be moved to serve out the rest of Governor Cook's term instead. Her term is, well, I'm going to say is not due to expire until 2038. Other names in the mix include David Malpass, who was World Bank director under Trump in his first term, and also potentially some of the names who are in the mix for Fed chair. They have also been rumoured to potentially take one of the vacant governor spots if Cook does indeed depart the Fed. And on that subject, Bloomberg also reporting late yesterday that the Trump administration is now examining options to exert influence not over the Fed board, which they are quite clearly already doing so, but also over the 12 regional Fed banks. Now, of course, for those who are unaware, the regional Fed banks in the United States actually operate as private institutions. Nevertheless, the presidents of those regional banks, which are appointed by the board of directors of those regional banks, they do need to be reappointed by the board of governors in Washington, D.C. once every 5 years, in years ending in a 1 and years ending in a 6. So that means next February there is going to be a vote among the board of governors, which up until now has always been a rubber stamp of, yes, this lot are fine, the regional banks are fine with them, we're happy with them as well. The Trump administration administration are now starting to look at whether they can make that less of a rubber stamping exercise. You can certainly imagine a situation where if in next February Trump has a majority of his appointees on the board, you can certainly imagine a situation where potentially some of those regional presidents, potentially the more hawkish regional presidents, find it a bit tougher to get their appointment reconfirmed. Although it
Right.
must be
Yeah.
said, this is a bit of a long shot. And also, even if these appointments weren't reconfirmed, it is then up to the regional banks to pick a new president. So it wouldn't be a case of their appointment is not reconfirmed and then Trump could just put in whoever he wants.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I did see Polt say he was sending something to, well, basically dobbing in someone else for mortgage fraud last
Oh.
night. But I've not seen who that is or if there's been any leaks about who that is. But he's definitely said he's doing another one
Oh, could he just dob himself in at this point? He's like
into a padded
ridiculous.
room.
Well, yeah, I was thinking off a cliff, but a padded room works
Wow.
equally well, I guess. Anyway, moving on from the Fed, Trump was all over newswires once again yesterday. We did have a 3-hour long cabinet meeting, which I'm sure all of the journalists in attendance were very, very pleased with. Incidentally, this was just the 7th cabinet meeting that Trump has held since he took office, which I found quite surprising, given that cabinet meetings here in the UK are held every week. But there we are. As usual, it was a bit of a circus with all of the various cabinet secretaries praising Trump for being the best thing since sliced bread and how he's making the country the best that it's ever been. News lines were relatively limited, although Trump was talking about tariffs. He said that a furniture tariff will be done pretty quickly and that tariff will be, quote, very substantial. Of course, details remain very, very thin on the ground on that one. We also heard from Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who said that GDP will now be on the blockchain. God only knows what that
Yeah, I
means,
saw
to be
that.
completely honest with you. I mean, does
Basically,
that...
not just GDP. Apparently, like all the financial economic data is going to be on the blockchain.
I mean, why?
Yeah.
Can we focus on getting the data to be accurate, which I think,
Yeah.
I don't agree with the way Trump's gone about that, but it is a valid concern. Can we just fix that before we start, frankly, fucking around with all this blockchain nonsense?
Well, I'm sure you can write a strongly worded letter.
I'm sure it will fall on completely deaf ears as well.
Well,
Like most of the strongly worded letters I write. We also heard from Howard Lutnick on CNBC as well. Of course, last week the Trump administration taking this 10% stake in Intel. Lutnick yesterday saying that that is basically unlikely to be the last company that the administration take a stake in. He was talking about the potential for the Pentagon to be mulling taking some equity stakes in defence contractors, the likes of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, or they're called RTX now, and such like. Of course, this is very much going down the route of sort of state intervention, state-sponsored capitalism, whatever you want to call it. It is not exactly the most market-friendly of policies, as we discussed at some length yesterday. The final thing I have to say about Trump before we can move on is that his well, I was going to say they're a media company. I'm not sure what sort of company they are. Yes, so I'm just going to read this headline out because I don't actually understand it. Trump Media, ticker DJT, is to acquire $6.42 billion worth of CRO for a digital asset treasury. Upon deal closure, the majority ownership of the CRO strategy treasury will be held jointly by Yorkville advisors, Trump Media and Crypto.com. Now, all I can tell you about that is CRO is called Kronos Coin. Quite why Trump is buying 6.5 yards of it, I have absolutely no idea. Go on.
we have got the crypto blast later today with Cam, so perhaps he can update us then.
Well, there you go. He's got 5 hours to go do some research.
There you go.
And hopefully enlighten us on what on earth is going on with that one. But I don't know, maybe that's the blockchain that Howard Lutnick is going to use for his GDP stats. God only knows what they're up to. Anyway, moving on to other bits and bobs from yesterday. In terms of markets, it was a decent day for risk. The S&P rallying by about 0.4%, the Nasdaq gaining ground by a similar amount. In terms of markets elsewhere, elsewhere, it was pretty subdued in the FX and precious metals spaces, although we did see a further steepening of DM government yield curves, notably here in the UK, worryingly, where the
Yes.
benchmark 10-year gilt yield rose by about 5 basis points on the day to its highest level since May at 4.75%. The 30-year yield, that's up 6 basis points yesterday to 5.61%, which is the highest level since April, and that April high is the highest level since 1997. Clearly, markets are, well, remaining very, very unimpressed with what the government are doing in terms of the fiscal stewardship of the UK. And a very good chart that's been doing the rounds, I think it was Simon French at Panmure Gordon who came up with
Yes,
this
it
first
was.
of all, comparing the 10-year gilt yield to the range in which other G7 benchmark 10-year yields have traded over the last decade or so. The spread on the 10-year gilt over the top end of that range, which is at the moment the 10-year Treasury, that's now at 48 basis points, which is its widest level in about a decade. Basically, the way to think about that 48 basis points is the UK is paying 0.5% more on its borrowing costs because of Rachel Reeves. That is effectively the premium that the UK is having to pay to
The
borrow because
aptly
of the
named
mismanagement.
aptly named the moron premium.
Well, I didn't want to say that because every time someone says that, I think they should be paying a royalty to our good friend Dario Perkins, who was the first one to coin that.
Was
And
he?
given he was, and given the number of times I've seen that mentioned, he'd be able to get himself a new gold BMW and another jigsaw puzzle in the last couple of days.
Oh wow. Well, I'm gonna have to message him later on after this then.
So if
Um,
you're listening, morning, Dario.
Morning. One thing to add on that is obviously we keep hearing about, well, from Labour politicians saying, oh, bank rates are coming down, interest rates are coming down, it's been makes it cheaper to buy houses, etc., etc. Well, guess what's happening today and tomorrow? At least one bank are putting up their mortgage rates, which is NatWest. And they won't be the first. Sorry, they won't be the last.
No, they
Um,
certainly won't be the last.
yeah. So not only is 30-year gilts and all this going up, or 30-year bonds going up, but mortgage rates are going to be starting going up. Cost of living's going up because we've just heard from Ofcom that, oh no, what, not is it Ofcom or whichever the one for the
Off
um,
gem.
Ofgem. We've just heard from Ofgem that the cap's going up as well. So the cost of living's going up, mortgage rates going up. Yeah, it's just a complete shower of shit.
Yeah, and actually on mortgages, I'm just looking at the swap rates now. The 2-year swap is at its highest level since the start of June. The 5-year swap is at its highest level since the back end of May. So it's not a UK specific issue whereby the central bank in question, the Bank of England, have lowered the overnight rate and the market-based rates have gone in the other direction. We saw that in the US as well. The problem is it's happening to a much greater degree here in the UK, and also specific to the UK because people tend to fix their mortgages for a relatively short period of time. The impact of that is passed through, is transmitted to the quote unquote real economy in much shorter order. So, you wouldn't be at all surprised if we're looking at, the 5-year swap back at 4%, which we haven't been at since Liberation Day at the start of April, but you wouldn't be surprised if we got there in relatively rapid fashion.
No, definitely not.
Um, Away from the UK, a few other bits and bobs just to rattle off from yesterday. Actually, I may as well stick with the UK firstly. We heard from the BOE's Catherine Mann. She was noting that policy is not tight enough in the August forecasts and that her activist approach favours a more persistent hold on interest rates, but she is ready for larger rate cuts if downside risks grow. Of course, you'll recall that Catherine Mann has been flip-flopping around all over the place on policy over the last 18 months. She was a hawk, then she became a dove. Now she appears to be a hawk once again, just as the labour market begins to grind to a halt. So absolutely brilliant policy making from that clown once more. In terms of economic data, we did have a few releases out of the States yesterday, both coming in better than expected, actually. Durable goods orders falling by 2.8% in July, an improvement on the 4% decline that had been expected, and also better than the 9.4% decline that we saw in June. We also had the August consumer confidence stats from the Conference Board. That index rose to 97.4, up from a prior 97.2. And yesterday's two-year Treasury sale was taken down in relatively solid fashion too, stopping through the when issued by 1.5 basis points. A couple of other headlines before I hand back to Ryan. Apple, they have apparently been discussing internal discussions on potential acquisitions of both Mistral and Perplexity. This is according to the information, citing sources. Of course, Apple really just can't get AI right, it would seem, and it does appear increasingly inevitable that Apple just end up buying one of the firms who is way ahead on AI because they simply are unable to get there themselves and do that in organic fashion. Speaking of Apple, they are going to hold a launch event on the 9th of September to introduce their iPhone 17 lineup. Apparently, this will include an updated base model, 2 fresh Pro editions, and an all-new version that uses a far thinner design than any prior iPhone. I don't care how fat the iPhone is, just give it a battery that can last all day and isn't on 50% by like 10 a.m. That's all I want. And I think if they did that, it would sell like hot cakes. Apple are also planning to introduce other new products, including a new Apple Watch, an updated Vision Pro headset, which of course was a complete flop when they launched it a couple of years ago, as well as a new HomePod Mini and Apple TV box. So I'm sure a few people will get
Ah,
very excited about that. And last, but by no means least from me this morning, bad news for market makers here in the UK. Taylor Wimpey are going to be removed from the FTSE
yes.
100 in the quarterly rebalance towards the middle of next month. So that order is never going to be filled now. But I'll stop there, Ryan, before you and me fall out.
Oh, exactly that. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Michael. Just quickly on AI, I see that a couple of Meta's massive hirings have already left and gone back to where they were before. So I would love to know what their signing on bonus clauses were like and if they've managed to keep any of that money because they might have had an absolute windfall. And thanks to Tom Talks Cars for posting that on Twitter this morning. But
Has
anyway,
he actually done something useful?
he always does something useful. You're
Mm.
just too hard on him. But anyway, some overnight news headlines from our dear friend Zach. So please do follow Zach. Actually need to restart the Substack as well, which I'll get that up and running. Starting off with tariffs and trade. Trump's doubling of tariffs on goods from India to as much as 50% took effect as scheduled on Wednesday. Japan's trade negotiator Akazawa will visit the US starting Thursday to discuss Japan's investment in the US. Again, as we said yesterday, there's a lot of numbers thrown around, but who actually audits this and checks to see if it's being spent? The world's top soybean importer, China, doesn't appear to have bought a single American cargo for the coming year, just days before the start of the US export season. This is according to Bloomberg before Angie starts shouting at me. Tune in for the grain market blast later today, where Angie will tell me if this is bollocks or not. But apparently, according to Bloomberg, this is risking shortages in China. Macro news, the Trump administration is reviewing options for exerting more influence over the Federal Reserve's 12 regional banks that would potentially extend its reach beyond personal appointments in Washington, according to Bloomberg sources. Trump has told advisors he wants to quickly announce a nominee to replace Lisa Cook on Federal Reserve's Board of Governors, with former World Bank President Malpass and Stephen Miron in the mix. That's the Wall Street Journal. Trump's attempts to force the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates in a bid to lower US financing costs and reduce the economy could backfire spectacularly. That's according to economists that have spoken to the FT. China's industrial profits, they fell for a third consecutive month in July, down 1.5% year on year, highlighting deflationary pressures and intense competition. As we keep saying, if that's the official data, what the hell is what the hell is the real data? A $1 trillion, that's with a T, stock rally in China, sparking concerns over risks, prompting some brokerages and fund managers to cut financing and limit purchases.
Well,
Too
can I
much
just say
too
the
much
biggest
buying is not the problem you normally have.
Well, I was going to say the biggest risk with any, whether it be a rally or a sell-off in China, is not the market move itself. It's that the man in the government comes and knocks on your door one day and goes, "Those shares that you thought were yours are mine now."
Well, no, exactly that. But also, can you imagine Trump coming up with an idea like that? Let's stop
Oh
people
God!
buying stocks. Anyway, China imports of liquefied natural gas are poised to decline for a 10th straight month year on year due to robust piped supply and higher domestic output. Australian consumers, their consumer price jumped by more than forecast in July as electricity prices spiked due to the timing of government rebates. Sentiment among German consumers is expected to fall for the third time in a row in September. I believe this data just came out, actually. I don't believe it did fall further than expected, as job loss fears and inflation worries weigh. South Korea is considering a sale of dollar bonds in what would be a test of global investor sentiment after President Lee's first meeting with Trump helped ease tensions. Geopolitical news, a Pentagon unit boosting adoption of commercial tech will deploy officials to dozens of allied countries, including Taiwan and Japan, to counter Chinese military buildup. Moving over to Iran, Iran and representatives of the UK, France and Germany will maintain contacts in coming days after nuclear talk concluded on Tuesday without breakthrough. But according to Trump, there is nothing to discuss anymore because they've got nothing to do with nuclear. But anyway, Venezuela will deploy vessels to key oil hub near Colombia in response to US decisions to send warships to the southern Caribbean. American and Western officials are worried that a Vietnamese tungsten mine and refinery may fall under Chinese control, threatening access to critical minerals. I've seen a few bits on this. A lot of Western officials have been visiting this mine in recent months, trying to gain access to it and work out where it's going to be sold to. Now, if it is sold to this Chinese conglomerate, then it could be a bit of a stinker for Western officials, and particularly Trump, who is very keen on getting these rare earths and etc. out of the Far East and over to the US. Equity news: China's cities are vying to remove NVDA from foreign and other foreign chip makers from AI supply chains, with Beijing targeting 100% self-sufficiency by 2027 and Shanghai expected to aim for 70%. So all this chatter about NVIDIA chips and whatnot could be all moot anyway. OpenAI's corporate restructuring is likely to slip in the next year as it negotiates key terms of its future relationship with Microsoft, complicating fundraising. SpaceX's Starship, a rocket launched to space and deployed satellites for the first time before surviving most of its return journey to Earth, marking a major milestone.
Surviving most. Does that mean that it crashed at the last minute?
Well, I guess so. I haven't seen it, but I guess, but you've got to break things. You've got to break things. I'm not going to have, I'm all for, mocking Musk when he talks bollocks about, robots in your home by next week and et cetera, et cetera. But what he's doing with Starship, et cetera, and SpaceX, I believe, it can only be praised, in my personal opinion. Some company called Cambricon Technologies, which I've never heard of before, swung to a record profit in H1, reflecting strong demand for Chinese chips amid Beijing's push for homegrown AI technology. TSMC, the chip giant, will see little impact from upcoming US semiconductor tariffs, as only 1% of its chips are exported to the US and 75% of Taiwan's exports are unaffected. Rio Tinto, the mining giant, their new CEO, Simon Trott, is restructuring leadership and elevating the head of the Pilbara mines to run its global iron ore operations. That's gone to Wall Street Journal. A group led by Mitsubishi Corp withdrew from 3 offshore wind projects in Japan, the latest setback for the global sector. BT's Openreach warned the UK rollout of ultra-fast broadband could be at risk if regulators don't ease restrictions. And finally, from me, the UK's National Wealth Fund partnered with 2 institutions to invest $500 million in a UK-focused battery storage developer seeking to attract more investment. And that's it from me. Back to you in the studio.
Good stuff. Thank you, Ryan. In terms of today then, not especially much going on throughout the European session. In fact, there are no notable economic releases. And actually, that goes for the US session this afternoon as well. In terms of scheduled events, though, there are a few things to bear in mind. At 6 o'clock this evening, we have a 5-year note auction out of the United States, $70 billion worth being sold off there, and you'd expect that to be taken down in relatively straightforward fashion. And then some big earnings after the close today. Of course, NVIDIA, the main highlight after the close, although we are also due to hear from CrowdStrike, HP and Snowflake as well. So the tech-focused people will be getting very, very excited after the close this evening. In terms of NVIDIA specifically, their report is due at 9:20 this evening, London time, 4:20 in the afternoon on the east coast of the United States. Expectations are for an EPS at $1.01, revenue at $46.2 billion, which will be above the top end of the guidance that NVIDIA issued in their prior report, which was at 45.9 billion, data center revenues at 41.3 billion, and a gross margin at 72.1%. That would be right in the middle of the previous guidance between 71.5% and 72.5%. Of course, focus will fall not only on the figures themselves, but also guidance for the coming quarters, particularly in terms of what NVIDIA are looking at with China. Of course, we know there have been, well, not only this quid pro quo with the Trump administration, but also now the Chinese government saying basically don't go and buy NVIDIA chips to all the firms within the country. In terms of market reaction, options price about a 6% move in NVIDIA stock after hours, which for a $4 trillion market cap company is ridiculous, but for NVIDIA, it's actually quite a chunk lower than we have seen in terms of other recent earnings reports. I recall that the Q1 report, I think, was like a 9% implied move, so somewhat more subdued. The stock is the biggest in both the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, a 14.5% weighting for NVIDIA in the NASDAQ now, which is quite frankly ridiculous. All else equal, if you extrapolate that options implied move into an index move, that could be about 0.5% in the S&P 500, about 0.9% in the NASDAQ, but also you've got to recall that there could be a potential spillover into other names within the sector. What I mean by that is, for example, if NVIDIA come in and absolutely smash things later on tonight, you would expect names such as Broadcom, AMD, Supermicro, etc., to also enjoy a bit of a rally in the after hours session. NVIDIA have beaten consensus EPS expectations in every quarter since the third quarter of 2023, but we're 50-50 in terms of gains and losses following the last 4 quarterly reports. My gut feeling, which is probably going to be hopelessly wrong, is that these earnings later on should be pretty solid. We've gone through Q2 earnings season with basically every man and his dog, not only increasing capex on AI, but also starting to show signs that they are being able to monetize that expenditure that they have thrown on AI and getting a return on that investment, which obviously bodes well for someone like NVIDIA, who are making all the chips that everyone needs to make those advancements in terms of AI. Other than that, usual reminder, markets will focus on trade and geopolitical headlines throughout the day, as well as anything else that we might get on Fed Governor Cook, which well, I don't know what's going to happen next in that shambles, and also potentially the regional Fed presidents that we mentioned earlier. But in terms of scheduled events, it really is all eyes on NVIDIA a little bit later on today. And that's all from me.
Wonderful, Mr. Michael Brown. Absolutely wonderful. Like you, I think everyone will be watching NVIDIA, given the size and the weightings, etc., for the next move in stocks. Listeners, whatever you're doing today, please stay safe, keep it tight.